Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West, looking for Ben Domenech. I think he's at CPAC. I didn't hear that, Adam. Ben, how are you?
There you. Sorry, no, I'm actually down in Florida, but the cell phone coverage is going in and out because there's a bit of a storm. So.
Okay, well then I'll get right to the heart of this. Ben, I have a puzzle for you. Trump is to Zelensky as FDR was to blank, and Richard Nixon was to blank. Who are the blanks?
So I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I will concede that I've not pre-formulated an answer to this question. So off the top of my head, I'll just let you answer it.
All right, I think it says FDR was to De Gaulle, and Richard Nixon was to two, and that means they call the shots. And if FDR wants De Gaulle to go into Paris, he gets to go into Paris, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. If he wants to sink the French Navy, he does. And if Richard Nixon wants to prop up two, he can for as long as he's president. And that Zelensky got out over his skis here. What do you think?
I think that Zelensky did get out over his skis, and I think that he is not De Gaulle, whatever he is, in terms of the strength that he actually has. And I think that there's actually a fragility to him now that is very apparent after everything that he's gone through. And, it's hard to judge the man for it. He was obviously never expecting to have to deal with the kind of challenges that he's faced in leading Ukraine. I think in terms of the positioning now, though, negotiations going forward are not going to be, I think, positively impacted by what we've seen happen over the course of the past week and plus. And, I really sometimes wonder who is giving the Ukrainians the advice that they're getting. I've had different people tell me some of the issues regarding that, but it seems like a number of different things that he's said, the feints that he's done, even kind of the choices that he's made, going back to when he was coming to Washington at certain points in ways that made House Republicans feel particularly uneasy. It really, I think, hurt his own cause, unfortunately.
Matt Continetti brought up last hour. He went to Pennsylvania to do a munitions factory tour with Shapiro and a congressman who got beat.
I unfortunately did not hear Matt say that because that was literally the next thing I was going to say. Because he's basically made these bets about the outcomes of American politics that have proven to be inaccurate several times, and I think that this is one more example of that. Unfortunately for him, it could be an example of it that has some pretty severe consequences. Now, Hugh, I personally, have sort of an interesting perspective on this, I think, because I did not read a lot of the immediate coverage that was focused, just by dint of traveling, that was focused on aspects of J.D. Vance's speech other than him being rude to the Germans. And that, to me, was interesting because it's almost like the media narrative shifted very rapidly into this vein of trying to cast Vance and his perspective on foreign policy as being something new and hideous, as opposed to what I believe it to be, which is pretty consistent with President Trump. And I think that that's something that the media is clearly flailing about, trying to attack different aspects of this. But the fact that they've decided to kind of take this speech that was a very interesting commentary on Europe's own denial of Western values, and that it needed to look inward and be self-critical in a way that I think were very pointed and accurate. That's a narrative that the media didn't actually want to run with. They wanted to move on beyond that and make this about some kind of embrace of the far right, even though it was a situation where he also had attended a summit that was about finding peace in Ukraine. I think that what everyone wants in this administration is peace in Ukraine, and they do not want, consistently I've heard this, the Russians to be in a position to go back in the next couple of years. Getting to that point is key, and it's going to require negotiation and being able to move on the fly, I think, in ways that Donald Trump has shown he is capable of in the past. This is maybe the biggest one yet, though.
I want to play for you something that Secretary Rubio, said today to Catherine Herridge at the Department of State in sort of an overview of the first month. And listen closely, cut number 3.
If I can just jump in, what I'm hearing you say is that in the last 4 years, there's been a breakdown in communication with China and also Russia.
Well, interestingly enough, the communication with China has actually been better than the communication with the Russians under the Biden administration and to the current day, which is why there has to be some level of maturity here and practicality and pragmatism when it comes to foreign policy. That said, we're not going to live in a world where we depend on China for critical rare earth minerals, for critical components in our supply chain. We're not going to live in a world in which China gets to dominate the Indo-Pacific, and we're not allowed to have commercial ties in that region because they're holding countries hostage, and they all become tributary states. The Japanese have no interest in being a tributary state, and they're close allies of ours. The South Koreans, the Philippines, Australia. None of these countries want to become tributary states. Vietnam, for that matter, are not interested in becoming...
Stop right there. What did you hear there, Ben?
So first off, I want to say that Catherine Herridge interview is excellent, and I encourage people to check it out. They can find it on X, and I think I certainly shared it. I don't know if you did as well. The conversation there, I think, is one that is really disturbing in the sense that the Biden administration's approach to communication with Russia was essentially, I'm not sure to say it's non-existent, but it was not something that was happening in the way that it probably ought to have been. Now I understand that the Democrats have been on the Russia side in terms of their narrative for a long time, but that doesn't mean that you don't have actual diplomatic communication back and forth. Sometimes that's the key to coming to conclusions on issues that are like this and that we face currently. And I also heard, of course, from him that this is a situation where on the China front, we want to be able to not have to rely on them to anywhere near the degree that we have in the past. But also, what I hear in the context of that is a little bit of a pushback against some of the president's eager Silicon Valley supporters who've been coming over in his direction in recent months. That's something that is obviously a challenge for them, and their interest in the China market is not something that just went away overnight when Donald Trump got elected. And navigating that moment, and who has Donald Trump's ear on the China question, I think is going to be very important.
Ben, I hope you write about this for The Spectator, because that's a very important and very deliberate interview. Here's what I heard. I didn't hear Taiwan. I thought Atchison moment, because I heard Japan, Australia, South Korea, Philippines, even Vietnam. They don't want to be tributary states. Am I reading too much into not hearing Taiwan?
I think it's a little early to say because it's one interview, but I also think that you are onto something there in the sense that Taiwan is something that the way that they talk about it and the way that they navigate that issue is going to be very critical going forward, and language means a lot in that space. And I think that we've all seen the level of devotion, not just, by the way, in the diplomatic world, but even to the range of what they do on TikTok, the range of what they do online, the way that they have affected Hollywood in recent years. The Chinese are so sensitive about this. Even the maps of the South China Sea and the exposed on ESPN, for instance, are part of the things that are consistent with this approach, where they just do not want to tolerate any kind of mention of it. Frankly, I wish that Marco Rubio had mentioned it, but I also don't want to read too much into it, given that it is just one.
All right. Now, I also have been I've been asking everyone about my construct, because lots of people who don't know national security are commenting on Trump and his team. They're everywhere, right? They got JD in Europe. They got General Kellogg in Ukraine, and in Europe they've got Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and Special Envoy Witkoff in Saudi Arabia and other places. And I'm saying to everyone, it's all part of a square. The four squares are: Putin is evil, but Russia is a great power and can't be defeated. Hamas is evil and must be defeated. Iran is evil and could be defeated. And China is evil, but they're our greatest adversary and they have to be deterred. And that you can't really separate any national security issue. And every time I read the media, Ben, they're all treating them in isolation, and that can't be done.
Yeah, and this is the other thing, and you're completely right with that, by the way, but this is the other thing. The media likes to talk in terms of globalist perspective and the rules-based international order and blah, 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 blah. But they don't understand any of it. They don't actually understand the interconnected nature of so many of these different things. And it's amazing to me, people who cover these stories for a living don't understand how they intersect and how important it is to be hearing in this moment, for instance, that China's perspective on what's going on in Ukraine is incredibly important. It's incredibly important for all the reasons that you and I understand. And yet, from the perspective of the media's coverage of this, it basically amounts to Russia bad, we shouldn't basically even be negotiating with them. We can't be realistic about any of the potential realistic outcomes of this war. Instead, we need to live in this fantasy land where Donald Trump can wave a magic wand, and it's simply his devotion to Putin or opposition.
I would carry it on a little bit, Ben, and I'll talk to you in a minute. Russia bad, Trump bad, Israel usually bad, but we're not going to say that after the execution of the Bebas kids, and we don't know anything about China, so we won't talk about it. And they own our parent company. I'll be right back, America, with Ben Domenech. I'm back with Ben Domenech. Ben, you know how this works. I'm scheduled to be on Special Report tonight. We pick winners and losers. May happen, may not happen. Breaking news comes in sometimes. The winner I sent in is Vice President Vance, because as Adam said of Jefferson, he has a peculiar felicity of expression. And he did those 2 speeches in Europe. He sat down at CPAC. He's on Twitter with Neil Ferguson, which is a dangerous place to be. And he's unafraid. What do you make of the vice president thus far?
You know, when J.D. Vance was picked, one of the things that I think a lot of people thought initially, especially after the shift to Kamala Harris, was that this was a riskier pick because he had such a short political career, because of the power of celebrity perhaps overwhelming, you know, the more experienced hands who the president could have gone with, and because there was this feeling that, you know, the president's going to max out his vote in Ohio anyway. You know, why don't people pick based on geography or something along those lines? I think that J.D. Vance has put to rest that notion, not just in his performance during the campaign, which got better and better and better after, frankly, having a little bit of a stumble with the launch, but then now he's showing his capacity for this role already in so many impressive ways that I can't believe that there is anybody who can look back and doubt that he was 100% the right pick. And anybody who was arguing otherwise, you know, I wasn't really arguing for one of the others, but I was just pointing out Marco Rubio is a more experienced international hand, that type of thing. But it's something to look at JD right now and say he actually has a message of to the American people, one that is consistent with, but also different than Donald Trump's.
Pause on that, because I agree. How do you see it being different from President Trump's?
I think it's different because of, quite frankly, generational perspective. I think he has the perspective of a younger father, and one that actually can have a lot of appeal to especially people who've lived during the COVID experience, meaning younger parents. I keep having people come up to me and say, wow, he's impressive. And that's something that I think that is not just true of the MAGA land, you know, natural fans of Donald Trump. It's true of a lot of people who I think can be won over in future years by conservative messages that speak to that experience and that take lessons away from them that should be applied.
Ben, do you remember Peggy Noonan's 2016 piece, The Rise of the Unprotected, where she said there are the people who make public policy and the rest of us who live in it, and by the rest of us she meant the unprotected. People who don't have any margin in their life. If their car breaks down, they're screwed. If their furnace goes out, they're screwed 3 times over. If they don't have insurance and they live in the Palisades, they've been screwed and they won't be able to rebuild for 7 years. I think JD's got the perfect swing for those people.
I literally was sitting next to someone yesterday watching the USA-Canada hockey game. No reason to know that it was political. We start talking, of course, and it turns to politics. And he brings up watching the J.D. Vance movie with his girlfriend, who has a young child, and talking about their experience growing up in an RV park together. Now he has his own company, and that kind of thing. And that's exactly the kind of younger person who has been through this most recent experience and come away with it, learning lessons, who should be watching that story and who should be paying attention to this young vice president, who I think is inspiring a lot of people.
I'm going to come back with one more segment with Ben to talk about Israel. Do not miss it. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I wanted to talk to Ben Domenech about the horror show in Gaza yesterday, because he's the father of young children. I'm the grandfather of young babies. I haven't been that horrified since 10/7. And I don't care what Israel does now. But what do you think, Ben?
I don't think anybody can look at that and have a different reaction that doesn't come from the most morally convoluted, backwards impression of the way that the world works. It's just horrible and astonishing, but it's also something that, quite frankly, Hugh, I was not surprised by. My wife was surprised by it. I had been sort of sensitively, navigating around her comments, hoping that against hope that there was still some possibility of a different outcome. But I truly believe that this was the case, and that Hamas was hiding it, that they were prepared to, they were preparing to try to navigate it as best that they could, which is, of course, clumsily, disrespectfully, and horribly, because they are as awful of an entity that exists in the world today. And I think
they're barbarians. Now,
yeah,
have the news caught up with you that Mrs. Bebas was not in the coffin?
Yes.
Okay.
And I am, of course, I'm horrified by it. But in the catalog of things, there's so much in favor. The wind is at the back of Israel at this moment. I think the American people will stand with them, whatever they decide to do. And it really, who can blame them at this point? This is such a devastating proof of how evil the other side is in this conflict. And I can't. I mean, for Americans who haven't paid attention to this, who didn't pay as close attention to this, I think it comes as a real shock for them. And for those who don't understand how evil Hamas really is, it's a wake-up call.
And now, we were talking about understanding the president, President Trump. I've noted over 10 years, he reacts viscerally to cruelty, especially to children, whether it's in Syria, whether it's happening to young people in Ukraine. I think he already had an understanding with the prime minister when Netanyahu came to the United States. I can't imagine Trump being a restraining force here on whatever Netanyahu wants to do. Can you?
No, I think this is going to be let the dogs run, and that's a situation where, Hamas brought this on themselves with their villainy and their action, and the president, you make note of that. I was standing in the Oval when he made remarks about the Ukraine war, where he was talking about the bodies of young people being ripped apart by bullets. Yep. Not a lot of people pay attention to that aspect of him, and I think you're completely correct. He reacts in a way. And it's by the way, I think it's also one of the reasons that he leaned so far into this is obviously not the same thing at all, but just caring about the boys and girls sports issue, where lots of people in the kind of corporate right were like, oh, this is making us uncomfortable or something like that. No, he viewed it as a violation. He viewed it as something that was horrible being done to young girls. And that's something that, when he talks about it again, he talks about it in a very visceral way. And I think that's because
I have an example for you, Ben. From the White House today, Donald Trump, all the governors of the states are there, including Janet Mills of Maine. And here it is, cut 14.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
Ben, first of all,
I
follow Janet Mills because I spent a lot of time in Maine, and she's double A ball, and this is MLB. All right, This is not where she should be playing. I'll see you in court. What do you make of that? Who wins that message exchange?
Some people lose their fastball. Some people never have it. and that's my takeaway from that exchange. And clearly, I think this. Look, if Democrats like the governor do not want to take any lessons from this, other than America's racist and foolish, and we just needed better messaging, then they are not going to be able to come back from it. And the sooner that you have idiots who think that they can win on this issue, where they have been clearly on the wrong end, deluded by the people who have been advising them for so long, they're going to continue to lose elections, and they're going to continue to be surprised by it.
Last word on this, Ben. There are 1.2 million people in Maine. I spend a lot of time there. Portland has 68,000. It's as crunchy blue as you get. But, you get up to the county or down east, and it ain't blue. And I saw the picture of the pole vaulter, and I don't want to pick on a trans girl. I don't know what the rules are. All I saw was that the girls who finished second, third, and fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh were not in a hurry from the pictures to congratulate the trans girl who beat them by a half foot.
No, it's absolutely astounding. And again, as the father of two little girls, it's one of these things where you understand it. It is a point of instant radicalization on an issue when you see something this obvious and this unjust. And look, the president realizes it, the people around him realize it, and until Democrats just recognize that they are completely on the wrong side on this issue, not just politically, but morally, ethically, et cetera, they're going to be learning, I think, some hard lessons on it.
All right, Stinger. Isn't David Hogg the greatest thing to happen to the Republican Party in years?
It's a gift. I can't believe that they did this. It's so amazing to see him working already, and I think he's going to continue to be a great boon. You couldn't plan a better situation for the arguments that Republicans are making than putting someone like him in this kind of.
I feel bad for the kid because he's trapped in being famous at the age of 18 for all the wrong reasons, and then he just works his fame, and that's just a dead end. It's like being a child actor, Ben. It's actually a bad thing.
Yes, it is, and I think that there's a lot of similarity there. You're rushed to the front of the line much earlier than you should be, and you don't have the kind of experience that will allow you to sort of learn. You're supposed to know everything and get everything right, and there's so many people who've been ruined by that in other industries, and that can happen in politics as well.
Ben Domenech, thank you. Always a pleasure. Enjoy your vacation, Ben. I appreciate the extra time. We found him. We interrupted him. And it's almost dinner, and his wife is probably mad at me. Please apologize to her for me.
Thanks as always.
B. Domenech on X. Read him at The Spectator. See him on Fox News. I don't ever think I've got him on vacation before.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.